Okay, so here is your 6B guided practice questions. Let's take a look at those. And so number 1, you've been doing great on that one, not worried about it. Number 2, a little bit of confusion, and so what I recommend with this one is try it out. I mean, if all of your sample values are the same, find out what your standard deviation would be, and so maybe you try it out with all your sample values are 5, and you have maybe 5 5s as your sample values. What would your standard deviation be then? And go through that process, which is what we're going to do now in number 3, is find the standard deviation. And so I'm just going to show you an example of this, kind of walk you through the process with some different values than what you're supposed to do here, just so you can see that process. And so finding standard deviation, what we want to do first is we need to find our mean. And so I'm going to use some new numbers if I can write that. That does not look very pretty. Let's try that again. So try and do a better job there. So we're going to have our set of numbers here. Right there. Those squiggly brackets. I'm having trouble with that on here, but you get the idea. We have the numbers 2, 3, 3, 6, and 1 as our data set, our sample here. And we want to find the mean first off. That's our first step in doing this. And so we need to take all our numbers and add them together, and we are dividing by 5 because we have 5 numbers in our sample set here. Okay, and so we add those up, ends up 15 divided by 5, which is 3, is the mean. Now we need to find out how far off each of these numbers in our set are from our mean, and so we're finding that difference. We take each of our data set numbers and subtract the mean from it to find that difference. And so if we do that with all of these here, again, 3 minus 3, and 6 minus 3, and then 1 minus 3 is -2. Okay, and so that's our difference for each of our data set values from the mean right there. And now we're going to square these numbers. And really this process of squaring is getting rid of those negatives. That's why we do that in here. But we're going to take each of these and square them and then add up those squares. So squaring each of those, -2 squared would give us here 1 plus some zeros we don't need in there, plus 9 plus 4, and so that sum is 14. And then we take the sum and we're dividing by 1 less than the number we have in our data set. So we had 5 numbers, we're going to divide by 1 less than that. And so we're dividing by 4 right here. And that gives us here 3.5 that we end up with. And last of all, our step is to take the square root of this. So I'm taking the square root of 3.5, and that kind of undoes this squaring that we did right there, and gives us 1.87 as our standard deviation. So the next part of the question asks, what does this mean, basically? And so kind of think back to our definition of what standard deviation is. Standard deviation is the measure of how far our data values are spread out from the mean. How far are they from the mean? And so on average, for this data set, the sample set that we have, our values are 1.87 from the mean of 3. Okay, and so either higher or lower, and so the bigger your standard deviation is, that means the bigger the spread is, the farther away from the mean on average your sample set is. Or smaller number like this one, 1.87 is a pretty small number. That means you don't have a very big spread. Most of your values on average are pretty close to the mean. is what that would be. So hopefully that helps you out with these. Let me know if you still have any questions.